All right, joining us now for reaction, Saftu General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi to get his views on this urgent announcement by President Ramaphosa. Vavi, good evening, and thank you so much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Except for some of the usual kind of rhetoric that we tend to hear whenever we speak about Eskom, there are quite a number of new announcements maybe that could particularly raise an eyebrow, especially things that would be happening in the next 12 months. The private license threshold being done away with completely. Let's start there. I'm sure it is something that would have grabbed your attention.
Well, let's start here. Thank you very much for inviting us. We are not in Nedlac. We remain locked out of that institution which government prefers as the only show in town when it comes to consulting workers in this country. And this leads to the exclusion of the second biggest federation in the country, which is the home of the private sector unions, with two of the most biggest manufacturing unions inside the federation not being consulted on a matter that is going to directly affect them in the private sector as opposed to those that are dominated by the public sector unions. I think that is important.
So that collective that the president is talking of, the executive at Eskom, Labour Movement, BUSA, BBC, civil society, political parties, you're saying you're not a part of that at all?
It's excluding. It's excluding NUMSA, it's excluding AMCU, it is excluding FAU, it is excluding all of the major private sector unions in our country. And that's a big problem. That's the first point that I want to make. We are not in that leg, so when they were talking there, they knew that the real people who are in the cold front of the economic activity in the private sector are not being consulted. The second part is therefore that we have obviously listened very carefully, but we'll still need to study the presentation of the president far more carefully so that we can give a more comprehensive response to what he was saying. This is our initial reading of what he was saying, and now we are using what we call a working class gut feeling, having listened to what he says. In the overall, there is an attempt to give everybody something to believe that their major concerns are being addressed. So there's an attempt to give some rhetoric to environmental groups, and Saftu is a very strong campaigner for environment in South Africa in the context of the calamities of climate change that are already visiting our country. There's an attempt to address our major concern about a move towards a renewables, and in particular with Eskom playing some role in ensuring that they roll them out themselves. But we note that Eskom have been left on the station cold. They were not allowed initially to lead the process of renewables in the country, and that sector have now been taken over and dominated by the private sector, more so the independent power producers from elsewhere. So even though Eskom is finally being unchained to participate in the renewable space, but it comes very late when the damage has been done and when the space has been clouded and crowded by the private sector investment. And thirdly, there's an attempt to speak to the communities who fear that closing of the coal mines will lead to major economic hardships, including job losses in their areas, particularly in Mpumalanga. But the main message in our view that we hear today is a message that seems to be suggesting that we are marching towards generation of electricity by the private institution. There's privatization all over the way. That's the overarching message. We will privatize. We will bring more private players. We will remove the limit from 1 megawatt to 100, and now from 100 to anything that is in your capacity.
That's right.
In the private sector.
Yeah.
There can be no better way of weakening ESCOM than that particular announcement the president have made.
There's a talk of skilled personnel, which I suppose speak to the workers that need to be brought in at ESCOM, saying in the interim there's no real commitment there as to when, I suppose, those people are going to be brought in, but a broad sense that the president is talking to some skilled personnel, past CEOs or maybe, I don't know, engineers at ESCOM that will be brought in at least in the next 12 months?
We can never oppose that. We can never oppose, despite that we have some reservations about the racial connotations of that statement on its own. Because you remember that ESCOM used to be a white boys club, and that it has transformed tremendously over the past 28 years or so. We hope that the statement that will be made is not a statement that has already been made through employment of a totally unskilled CEO who have no experience whatsoever at ESCOM, who was brought in from a private sector and has been found absolutely wanting. In fact, under the current CEOs, we have seen major blackouts that have not been matched by any of the previous CEOs.
Yeah.
We hope that the president is not talking about bringing more of the likes of Andre Directors to create a total shame on the basis of the color of their skin.
Yeah. Here's a more direct appeal by President Cyril Ramaphosa to Labour. It says, Labour should engage in a spirit of partnership, mindful that achieving energy security is the most important thing we can do to protect existing jobs and creating new ones. Is that how you're going to be coming into your own analysis?
It's a very important statement. It's a very important statement for Mzuli. But it must start by consulting. You cannot shave anybody's head in their absence. You cannot continue to impose solutions using your preferred structures of engagement that you know exclude the majority of the affected workers in the mines, in the manufacturing sector, and elsewhere in the agriculture in this economy. And that's a false start in our view. It's something that makes the president to feel good that I've spoken to Labour when he knows that the type of Labour he's speaking about is that is dominating in the public sector and not where it matters most, where 80% of the economic activity is taking place, which is in the private sector. That's where Saftu unions are.
It's a quick squeeze at it. We'll bring you back after you've collated your minds and come up with a comprehensive statement, and then we'll unpack it a little bit further. But let me thank you for your immediate reaction this evening.
Thank you very much.
That's Saftu's General Secretary there, Zwelinzima Vavi, giving us a knee-jerk reaction from, as he puts it, a worker's analysis at first glance. They're going to deep dive into it and give us more details of what they think of that statement.